So I'll just start off with a video. Okay, that's just a quick video to introduce why Plastic Pollution Coalition is actually having an active campaign on lead pipe replacement, which may seem like an unlikely ally. And so to introduce us a little bit more, oops, there we go. So Plastic Pollution Coalition is a nonprofit communications and advocacy organization that collaborates with an expansive global network of organizations, businesses, and individuals to create a more just, equitable, regenerative world free of plastic pollution and its toxic impacts. And we actually have over 1,400 organizations and businesses covering 75 countries with coalition members all around the world. So what we already know, we recently got involved in the lead service line replacement after we saw the 15 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law and this incredible goal to replace all lead service lines in 10 years. However, what we also know is that this is less than a third of the funding needed, and there is no safe level of lead, especially for children. So this really woke us up to ask a few questions, which is one, how will communities get clean water in the years to come? As I said, with only a third of the funding actually already granted, it's going to take years for that last lead service line to be replaced, with some cities having estimates of 100 plus years, like Chicago, before that last lead service line can be replaced. So we really want to make sure that we're providing solutions right now for families to protect their kids and just all communities. And then we are also wondering what guidance is provided for replacement service line materials. We know in some places like Newark, which has been leading the way, copper pipes were selected. However, we're also seeing PVC and plastic pipes go out in shipments all across the country to replace lead, which we see as a regrettable replacement. So this really woke us up to get in contact with the Office of Water and the Senate to ask what consideration had been given to these questions. And unfortunately heard that there just really hadn't been those conversations, especially around the replacement service line. They were giving the money and then it was down to the states and cities to decide. But as we know from the accelerator program, there are many cities that won't have the capability or the capacity to really do all of this research and to make the selection. And EPA really has an opportunity to provide guidance that will protect communities across the country as they undergo lead service line replacement. So this is where our campaign came to be. So as we replace toxic lead service lines across the country, we need to ensure that we do not replace lead pipes with plastic pollution. We can bolster communities against the devastating impacts of lead and plastic by distributing options for filtered water, not plastic bottles, and replacing the lead service lines with plastic-free pipes, namely recycled copper or stainless steel. So filter, not bottle. This is a two-component campaign, and we work with a lot of partners across the country on this. Plastic Pollution Coalition is leading on the filter, not bottle component. in partnership with Beyond Plastics, which is leading on plastic-free pipes, as well as a whole host of other groups that have been supporting us and helping to inform the content all along the way. So to introduce filtered, not bottled, it's really a no-brainer swap that we could be amplifying all across the country. Filters drastically reduce cost. Often we know in water crises, families are expected to buy water bottle to protect themselves, which can be up to $2,000 a year. And we know that these are already poor, underserved communities, and we do not need to be adding another financial burden where we can distribute a filter and the replacement filters for up to a year for as low as $50. So it's really financially a very simple solution while also mitigating massive amounts of plastic pollution. We did the estimates, and to supply families with the water bottles they needed for just 6 months would take up to 32 billion water bottles, which then ends up heading to the waste infrastructure or in the environment of the lead service line impacted communities. Filters are also a no-brainer because while they can remove lead, they can also reduce emerging water contaminants, which we know many of these communities, the water infrastructure has been way underfunded. And so they're also seeing issues with PFAS and microplastics and other issues. And filters really puts the solution in families' hands. It's a way to rebuild trust in the water system and also a sense of autonomy that you can protect your kid and you're not reliant on the water system to provide updates or warnings of when you shouldn't be drinking your water. And then to intro the perils of PVC plastic pipes, we know that PVC plastic pipes are an environmental injustice nightmare. PVC production, which is predominantly in Texas and Louisiana, releases toxic chemicals into the frontline communities at every stage. And we saw what happened when a vinyl chloride train was derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, earlier this year. Vinyl chloride is a key component of PVC piping, and this train explosion had serious impacts on the surrounding community and only highlights why we should not be using these toxic materials. PVC can also leach chemicals into the water, such as endocrine disrupting, organogenic, and carcinogenic chemicals, while also creating another plastic pollution nightmare because, as I mentioned, the toxic additives make it really difficult to recycle, and these pipes often end up in landfills or incinerated, which only exacerbates the negative environmental injustice impacts on frontline communities. So I'm actually going to drop in the chat 2 of the reports that recently released on PVC pipes for you to learn a little bit more. Put out by the Perils of PVC Plastic was Beyond Plastics, Plastic Pollution Coalition, and Environmental Health Services. And the environmental justice piece is from Toxic Free Future. So I'm seeing Rachel's note that that train was headed for New Jersey. So this is just a nightmare from start to finish when it comes to PVC pipes. So how this started was in September 30th, 2022, a group of organizations leading on plastic and toxic health were created a letter to the EPA, to the Office of Water, with 2 recommendations. Advise on the use of filtered, not bottled water before, during, and 6 months after lead service line replacement. So what I'm sure many of you know, the current lead and copper rule does require filters for up to 6 months after the lead service line replacement, but what is happening in the years before? And also to discourage the use of toxic plastic pipes like PVC and recommend safe alternatives like recycled copper. And I will add the letter to the EPA. I have a whole host of links, so just bear with me, and I can also send additional resources in email after the presentation. So our target for our campaign is the Office of Water and EPA Administrator Michael Regan. We know that the lead and copper rule is coming out with an improvement draft, which is expected for release in early November. This is where there's currently the language on filtration. And we would like for there to be recommendations for filtered, not bottled, and plastic-free pipes to take up an opportunity to educate broad communities and set us on a path to clean, toxic-free water. And we are, as I mentioned, we are a global alliance, and our strength is really at the federal level. So our goal is to amplify the voices of the states and communities who know best and who have been fighting this fight for years, and take that pressure and help utilize the connections we have at the federal level to really advance broader action. We also know, and this was something that Amy Goldsmith and Doug had helped highlight for me in previous meetings, was that filters need education. They're not always used correctly. I know that they were distributed in Newark, and there are issues with using it with hot water, not replacing them correctly or as often as needed. So there really needs to be an education component here. We have decades of relying on single-use plastic bottles, and there is this feeling of health and safety with them that is inaccurate. And so we need to build that same trust in filters and also the understanding of how to use them. So we also, as a primarily communication organization, are helping to put out resources that can help educate communities and also provide some graphics and materials that can be easily distributed by communities on the ground and adapted as needed. And as I mentioned, yes, this takes a lot of community outreach. We actually know that Denver has actually already started to distribute filters, and Washington, D.C. is exploring it as well currently. And so also collaborating with those city councils or wherever they are distributing the filters to make sure they have all the resources they need. And a lot of this is on our website, but adding it in here as well. So why am I here at Lead-Free New Jersey in particular? New Jersey, we know, is one of the most heavily impacted by lead pipes, but there's also a lot of action and opportunity here. When I first met with Deandra and Cassie, I was just blown away by the network that you have created and all the different components of action that you bring together. So a few things that that could look like is an actual pilot program, partnering with what we hope would be an accelerator city that was recently selected to actually implement these recommendations and show what it takes. What are the financial costs? What are the distribution needs, the education needs? And so this is something that we've been exploring with Senator Booker and also the Office of Water to see what that kind of implementation would look like in a pilot city or in an accelerator city. There's also the state bills, which Deandra helped flag for me, that are currently active on filtration, one on filters in child care centers, and another to protect renters impacted by lead service lines and make sure that a recommendation for filters is distributed. We also hope to just uplift your success. As you know, with Newark, this is one of the shining case examples of how it can be done quickly when many cities have, as I mentioned, 100-year-long estimates. So really uplifting the success and the network that you've helped to create, and then bringing that to the federal level in collaboration with Senator Booker and the Office of Water to really elevate these recommendations, all culminating in public comments on the LCRI, which should be released any day now. So we'll be preparing public comments there. So a little bit more just on how you can support at your organization in particular. We have a campaign letter that is growing every day. This is just some of the organizations that have signed on, and we would appreciate your support for your individual organizations. We also have an active petition that we are sharing on Action Network that you should feel free to share with your communities. If you do use Action Network, you can also co-sponsor to help elevate these requests to EPA Administrator Michael Regan. And then just be on the lookout for correspondence from me on the LCRI in particular and what is included and how we can help improve the LCRI to protect all communities, and joining in on the efforts from Senator Booker's and the other 15 senators calling for an increase in the lead action or a decrease in the lead action level, and then banning partial replacements and more. So we're really looking to help guide where we can on plastic in particular, but then also just be a huge uplifter for all the communities who know best on the situation and have been doing this work for decades. And here's my contact if you'd like to reach out.
Hooray! Thank you so much. That was really, really punctual and so informative. So I just wanted to open up now for questions and answers for the group. Maybe I have a first. Oh, Yvette, you have a question?
Yes, I do. So I agree with you with what you were saying, and especially about the education and outreach piece, which is critical. What we found though in Newark and what has happened across the country in many urban areas, especially, is when residents are giving filters, they're educated about it and shown how they work, and that's all great. However, when you're working 2 and 3 jobs and your baby is crying at 2 and 3 a.m. and you want to sleep, and at the same time it's like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm not thinking about flushing. Oh, I got to brush my teeth. I'm not thinking about all of that. I just got to hurry up and do. So I don't know if you have really addressed that or talked about that, because that's something I keep raising and talking about with groups I'm a part of locally as well as on a national level. And that is real. So it's something we've got to acknowledge and figure out, okay, what are we going to do? So all of this is, of course, attached to equity, and it's attached to income and wealth and all of that. So, Madison, I'm just wondering if you have heard that cry at all.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate you bringing that up. That was one of the considerations when selecting a solution was the time and financial burden were the number one concerns. In many places, there is a recommendation for like full home filter solutions, or in Newark, for example, the pitcher filter or the filter you install on your sink, and just adding any additional burden was just not something that we wanted to support, which is why we've actually been trying to connect with filter companies that do pitcher filters, which can really reduce the burden on families on installation and maintenance, which may seem a little bit surprising because often they are plastic, but because they can be as low as $50 a year, we knew that the cost was going to be a priority for communities. So making sure that that was at the forefront. And then also just addressing this with the plastic water bottles, that cost is often going on to the family. Or we saw this in Benton Harbor, where families are expected to wait in line at community centers where they're passing out these water bottles. So it's again just more time and more of a burden. And also, we saw in Michigan, there was extreme cold temperatures when these are being passed out. So it's just something that's not safe. And that's something that we see. And then with the pipes in particular, I know this is something that we've talked a lot about is copper is just going to be more expensive, and how do communities handle that financial burden? And we actually met with the mayor of Newark, and what we heard was that while it is a very significant cost, it was very, very small. The main cost was digging up the streets. So when selecting pipes, they did have more flexibility because most of the cost was lying elsewhere. And so that's definitely something we're thinking about. And also just asking the EPA to recommend better alternatives. We know PVC pipe is just the worst option. And so coming out and doing the research and providing the findings on what are better, more affordable solutions.
Does
Oh yeah,
anyone
and
else
definitely
have
on
a question?
okay.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say I saw in the chat that education and language barriers is definitely something that we're thinking about as well as translating all of our resources and connecting with some of our partners at Green Latinos and other organizations to help make sure that there are more accessible versions of all these education materials.
That was actually going to be my question too. Like, how
No.
quickly do you turn around if we need things translated into Portuguese, for instance, something like that? That's really helpful. Thank
Yes, as far as other languages, oddly enough, my other hat is I run a global plastics database where we connect with a lot of different partners around the world. All that to say, I am very much in contact with a global network of plastic policy experts who have offered translation materials. And again, like communications is really our strong suit. So it's definitely the front of our mind when we talk about turnaround or providing that as easily as possible.
Excellent. Does anyone else have questions?
I
And if we
have
have any
two
questions after, oh, go ahead.
I have two comments, not questions, that I wanted to share broadly. And with Madison too, I know one thing, as we're talking about the filter conversation and installing it in the home itself rather than the pictures, that's where we run into the advocacy for renters, because some landlords prohibit affixing anything to the property. And so there's also like an education piece about where landlords come into this conversation. And then to one of your other points, about where the cost lies, there's actually been some research that even the administrative fees, so just to shut down the road and get the police present, the permitting to dig the pits for lead service line replacement can be up to about 30% of the cost of like the lead service line replacement. So if we think about it, when a utility decides what to put in when they take out the lead, down to also they have to cut costs where they can, because just to even start the replacement, the permitting fees, the police presence to shut down the road, getting all of that is going to cut into the cost. Where once they start doing calculations for everything necessary to start replacements, at the very end of it is, all right, now the pipe is out, what do we put in? And when the budget has already been sliced and diced, the cheapest thing now goes in. So there's also a lot of conversation around like, how do we target municipalities about, do we all agree that lead is a public health issue, and so maybe we should have special pricing for road work when it comes to this public health emergency, maybe using like off-duty police instead of regular hours, because you're trying to save cost on the permits, which that's not really the biggest problem. That shouldn't be what's eating the cost. So these are some of the policy issues that we target on the task force, but I just wanted to bring that here, that yes, we're finding that there's other hidden costs that are impacting the decision the systems make on like what goes in the ground. So lots to do.
Yes, definitely. And thank you for all that context and just experience with the permitting process, which I have not been involved in. So I really appreciate that. One thing just on the funding in particular, because I definitely hear you that they're going to be cutting costs wherever they can. In particular with the clean water solutions for right now, which we see as the filters. One thing that we've been exploring, which is something that's taken hold in DC, is actually using the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So the COVID funding that's hasn't been used in certain areas could be an immediate way to step in, especially when you think of childcare centers. Many of these schools did have ARPA funding, and this could be a way to take the financial burden off the communities, but still have solutions very quickly.
Nice. That's what it's all about. And doing it as soon as possible. So thank you so much. Does anyone else have any questions? Going once, going twice? Okay. I want to
Thank
just
you
quickly,
all. Yeah, just
yeah,
for
thank
giving me
you.
the space